I just got myself so pumped to film. I went to press record and then turn the camera off. Oh, it's gonna be that kind of day. Hi everyone, I hope you're all okay. It's crazy how much different I feel on camera now. I just feel so much better that there's people actually here and I'm not just speaking to myself. Today's video is a bit different than any I've done before. You'll see why. It's kind of got paranormal elements to it. It's, don't want to say anymore, a bit different. But I really hope you like it. I was really interested in this story and I only heard about it like a couple of weeks ago, so it's brand new to me. And when cases are brand new to me, I feel like I'm more excited to tell people. I haven't decided what I'm doing with this video in terms of pictures, whether I'm going to show them or not. But if I do show pictures, I will give you plenty of warning to look away if it's not something you want to see. Again, all will become clear. I feel like I want to do more videos now that I can upload on a Thursday. At the minute I'm trying to be very respectful, and I am respectful of the cases. You know, these people have passed away. I don't really want to be laughing and joking through telling you all these stories, but I do want to expand into doing more things, not just true crime. So if anyone wants to see anything from me, please let me know. I would love to do anything that I'm asked, within reason obviously. You tell how much happier I am. I've got a cider and I've just had fajitas. Doesn't take much. Also, apologies, my face in last week's video was not okay. I was so tired, I was so sick. I looked like Gollum. It was not a nice sight, and I'm really sorry if you watched me on a really big screen. Ooh. So let's get into the case anyway. This is a Russian case, so as per usual with anything that isn't English spoken, I'm very sorry in advance. I'm just going to say once that I'm sorry for pronouncing things wrong. I also learnt that you don't pronounce it Moscow, you pronounce it Moscow. Do Americans say Moscow? Because in my chessboard killer video I said Moscow all the way through it, and I think it's cause Anastasia says it in Anastasia. I think that's where I got it from. How sad is that? So I'm sorry if I say anyone's name wrong, please bear with me. Anatoly Moskvin, or Tolia as he was known to some people, was born in Nizhny Novgorod. His parents were Yuri Fedorovich and Elvira Alexandrovna. He attended school 184 or 184, I'm not really sure how they say it. And he was a really intelligent child. He was quite introverted. He liked collecting stamps, liked reading his books, liked to learn. And he loved writing stories too, and all his other classmates liked reading his stories, but his other classmates weren't always that supportive. He was picked on by his classmates a little bit, but they did like him on the whole. They went as a class to do farm work this one time, and there was actually fights to be partnered with him, because when he was doing all the farm work he would pull up different plants and he'd be able to pronounce all the names in Latin, and all of his classmates just thought this was really cool and wanted to watch him do it. When he was about 7 or 8, Anatoly came home one day and he was just covered in bruises, and he had actually been raped by a man on his way home. He didn't know this man, and his parents knew there was something wrong, but he wouldn't tell them. When they tried to ask what had happened, he just got really aggressive, so they just assumed maybe he got into a fight or something like that. They never thought that he'd been raped. It's not actually known if Anatoly told his mum and dad about this maybe a few months later, or if this all came out when he was a grown-up. And Anatoly's mum and dad knew that he was introverted, knew that he had his own little hobby and his way of doing things, and they didn't see anything wrong with it, so they just left him to do pretty much whatever he wanted. He was never much trouble, he just had his own way of doing things. They knew he didn't really have friends and struggled making friends, and after this attack especially he became more and more introverted, and again he wouldn't speak to his mum and dad about it, he would just refuse. But because he seemed happy when they left him to do what he wanted, that's just what he continued to do, and they just moved on. Even though he was described to be more awkward socially, his love for learning never went anywhere. He started buying himself more and more books and started to teach himself languages. On March the 4th, 1979, when Anatoly was 12, he was out with his class collecting recycled paper. All the schools used to have competitions to recycle paper that were organised by the government. They'd send all the classes out to basically see who could collect the most. And sometimes this made the kids kind of do naughty things. Would you call them naughty? kind of, you know, trespass and go into places they wouldn't, or maybe, you know, rob a few bits of paper from places. And Anatoly saw a large chunk of cardboard in a yard and he didn't see anyone around, so he went into the yard to go and get it. I just want to say that I have seen another version of this story which says that he was found by some people and brought to this place, so I'm just putting this in now, that one or two ways of getting there, but both the same story that comes out of it. When he was in the yard, he looked around and he saw a large group of people holding candles and singing in a foreign language over a coffin wearing black robes. Obviously it's not the most normal thing to see, so Anatoly just wanted to get right out of there, and as he went to leave, one of the people saw him, grabbed him on the shoulder and pulled him back. They told him that he needed to kiss the person in the coffin, and this boy was 12 or 13, so it must have been really, really scary for him. The funeral was for a child, which was 11-year-old Natasha Petrova, and she'd been getting out the bath at home. She reached for a towel and instead of grabbing the towel, she grabbed a loose electrical cable and she was electrocuted. So she died pretty much instantly. Natasha's relatives were all trying to get Anatoly to go towards the coffin and kiss her, and obviously he really didn't want to do this. He didn't even know her and he'd never seen anything like this before, but Natasha's parents were absolutely insisting that he go and kiss her. Obviously this is a really weird situation to be in and I can't imagine being in it myself, but I don't think that the people were trying to be mean, and I want to emphasise that, like from what I've read anyway. I think to them it was just the custom to do, and I think maybe they thought by him seeing it and not taking part it may have been bad luck or something. Anatoly said, "A woman, apparently the mother of the deceased, gave me a large Hungarian apple and kissed my forehead. She led me to the coffin and promised me a great deal of candy, oranges and money. She told me to kiss the deceased. I burst into tears and begged her to let go, but the sectarians insisted. Everyone again sang prayers in a language I did not understand, and one of the adults drew my head to the waxy forehead of the girl in a lace cap. I had no choice but to kiss where I was ordered." Anatoly kissed Natasha on the forehead and was given 2 copper rings by the family, so one he had to put on Natasha's finger and the other one was for him to wear. They told him not to tell anyone what had happened for 40 days, give him some fruit and some money and then just let him go. When he left, he threw the fruit away straight away and then went and spent the money on a book about animals. I really wanted to know what religion this whole ceremony came from and I couldn't find an answer, because obviously it's like a marriage. What happened between them? It's like the family married them. My Google search history must just be, but I did find out. I didn't find out the religion, that was not what I meant, but I found that marrying a dead person is called posthumous marriage and it's actually quite common. Not as common as like brushing your teeth, but it's common, more common than you'd think. And that's like across a lot of countries and religions, although usually from what I've seen you have to get a lot of permissions before you do it. I don't know if that's just nowadays or what, but yeah, in lots of countries you can marry deceased people. I think maybe because this little girl obviously died very suddenly, maybe the family were really upset that she wouldn't grow up and get married, so they saw Anatoly dropping in as a sign that maybe this should be a thing. That'd make more sense if the story about him being actually taken to the house was true. If he was just looking for a paper, it's a bit strange that he just dropped in and happened to be there. It makes more sense that this was maybe planned by the family in a way. Also, the 40 days thing is a common mourning period for lots of religions as well. In the Bible, it's always like 40 days, 40 nights, so I think that's where that came from. This is where the story gets slightly paranormal, if it wasn't already. Natasha actually started coming to Anatoly in dreams every single night, asking him to learn black magic and trying to tell him about it in his dreams. He kept saying no and the dreams wouldn't stop until he went back to Natasha's village and the dreams stopped for a bit, but then when he went back to normal they started again. They got that bad that he actually went to his mum and dad to tell them about the dreams and what had happened with Natasha and the family and everything, and they took him to the doctors. The doctor just said he's starting puberty, his emotions and feelings and everything else is all up in the air, so they give him valerian, which is a sedative and it helps him relax. Or sedative. I don't know how to pronounce that one either. This is why you're meant to speak to people, because you hear how words sound. These visits from Natasha lasted a whole year and Anatoly was completely fed up with them. So Natasha told him in a dream that he was able to pass the burden onto someone else, and she described a black magic ritual to him which involved getting a tooth from one of the classmates and passing it on to them basically. So that's just what he did. He somehow managed to get a tooth. I'm not really sure how you go about that with a person, but he did it. And he performed the ritual, and then Natasha didn't visit his dreams again. But whenever he was close to her town, he'd visit her grave. After this whole incident with the funeral and Natasha, he really developed an interest in cemeteries, death and the occult. I think a lot of people, when they hear about people going to cemeteries, they're always like, oh, it's so weird. But genuinely, I find cemeteries really peaceful. Is that strange? I don't know. I'm terrified of death. You wouldn't think so with me making these videos, but I don't know. Something about cemeteries, they're always just so lovely and well kept, most of the time anyway. I don't know. So I don't think that's particularly strange, especially after everything he went through with this. But it definitely had an effect on him, and he just liked going to cemeteries, and that's where he would go to read and study, and he just became really interested in them. When Anatoly grew up, he studied at the philological faculty of the Moscow State University, and he knew 13 languages at this point, which is crazy, and he was self-taught for all of them. When he was in university, he joined a society of Luciferians, and he'd do black magic rituals with dead animals. He actually had to take a test to see whether he was able to do the black magic, which he passed. He also vowed to be celibate and also to not drink and not smoke. They are a pretty strict society. Anatoly said, "In the era of perestroika, I decided to study magic. Knowledgeable people did not refuse to teach me after I told them the story of my marriage to Natasha." Anatoly really regretted not welcoming his visits from Natasha at this point, because he now had this big interest in black magic and the occult. He was a bit sad that he never kind of embraced those visits. Once he graduated from university, he began teaching Celtology at Nizhny Novgorod University. He used his translation skills to publish 4 dictionaries. There were 2 Russian to English dictionaries, a dictionary of foreign phrases, and one that was school phrases for children. He was described as a genius, eccentric, and while he was also described to be a kind person, some people said that he was difficult to get along with. He left the university after disagreements with the staff, and it's never actually made clear exactly what the argument was about, but either way it made him leave. So instead of teaching at the university, he decided to turn his attention to writing and to tutoring, and he loved tutoring children. He was asked to teach them languages and also to do things like history, literature, because he was quite intelligent, so he went through a lot of subjects with the kids he tutored. In 2003, when Anatoly was 37, he met a woman called Yulia Granova. Yulia was quite a spiritual woman, and because of Anatoly's celibacy, they entered into a non-sexual relationship, which worked for both of them. They were happy with that, they just wanted a companion. He was living with his mum and dad at their apartment, and the only money coming in for him was articles that he had published in various newspapers and also his tutoring, so it was very as and when. He wasn't on a steady income at this point. Yulia really wanted a child, and Anatoly loved spending time with kids too, so he was all up for it. But obviously, because of his vows and their non-sexual relationship, they couldn't have their own child, so they decided to sign up for adoption. But unfortunately, because of Anatoly's work situation, they failed the adoption check because they just thought that there wasn't enough money there to raise a child. So it was a no for adopting. His mum and dad weren't too thrilled with the idea of him adopting a child either. He still lived with them, so it wasn't really his house to raise a child in. It started a massive argument in the house when they said that they wouldn't be okay with it anyway. Anatoly said to his mum that if he couldn't adopt, he would be engaged with black magic and he would get in touch with the spirits of the dead. And for all his life, his parents just let him do his own thing. Whatever kept him happy, they just let him do. He was quite eccentric and they were used to him by now. So when he said everything about the black magic and getting in touch with the dead, his mum was just like, okay, that's nice, do whatever you want. Because of all this, and with him still living with his parents, with him not having much money, his whole relationship with Yulia just fell apart, and unfortunately they separated. And once again, Anatoly decided to go back to his research and back to his work. On July the 18th in 2005, Anatoly was hired by Oleg Ryabov, who was a well-known historian, and it was to take part in a new business venture that he'd organised. Oleg was writing a book called Nizhny Novgorod Necropolis, and he wanted Anatoly to travel all around the region, going to different cemeteries and researching them. He wanted records of people that had kind of been lost and wanting to find out which cemetery they were located in, and also to see if he could find out some little other bits of history while he was there. So Anatoly agreed to this. He travelled across the region for 3 years, walking around 30 kilometres a day sometimes. The buses at that time only left once a day, and although he did have some people that would be really nice and take him from cemetery to cemetery if they were going that way, most of the time it was on foot, and he'd be walking 30 kilometres ahead each day. And as he walked, he read. He said, "My legs walked on the roads, my eyes walked on the lines." So he'd travel to these cemeteries during the day and he'd get there around nightfall. He'd always be trying to look at the names on the headstones to record what he found. So he'd be taking off all the moss, he'd be cleaning them sometimes, chiselling away. He'd be taking the names, the date of birth, date of death, and any other info down in his notebook. And at this time, Anatoly pretty much slept anywhere he could. He slept where he landed, basically. It could be in little piles of hay he found, it could be just in random holes in the wall. In a Muslim cemetery in Sagaksky, he actually found a coffin that was being prepared for a funeral, and he slept in that overnight. And he was found by 2 grave diggers who were already drunk, and they were very confused as to why he was in there. But because they were drunk, they weren't really mad, so it was just all laughed off. And he never got in trouble, really, ever. He was stopped and searched a few times by police, but the police were never really around the cemeteries. He said that there was usually just a few lazy ones who would be kind of parked there pretending to do work. When he was searched, he had all his research and his passport on him anyway, so he'd just show that to the police and they'd agree that he wasn't doing any harm and they'd send him on his way. In 2006 in Butalinsky, he was accused of stealing by a group of men, and instead of them beating him, which he really asked them not to do, he didn't want to be hit, they took him down to the police station and he was questioned, everything was fine, it was smoothed over, but he was driven to the end of the town and told not to come back. In September of 2006, he was in a cemetery and there were people mourning the death of their daughter, and they thought he was a priest and asked him to sing with them, and he just was like, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I'm not a priest," and the men decided to mug him, steal his money and steal his watch. But obviously they were mourning by a headstone with a name on it, so Anatoly was able to tell the police what the name was, and then the men were tracked down and they were arrested. So he had a pretty smooth trip and the police didn't give him much trouble, but people in general did. But all of this combined was exhausting him, and in 2007 it was said to just be an extremely hot year, and Anatoly was that exhausted that he would drink from puddles in the graveyard and on the way. I don't know if he couldn't get water or if this was a choice, I don't know. So between 2005 and 2007, Anatoly visited 752 cemeteries in 35 districts. He uncovered the lives of over 1,000 people that were thought to have just been lost. Between 2006 and 2010, after all of his research with the cemeteries, Anatoly wrote for various papers on cemeteries and on history. He wrote an article about the Mongol Tatar invasions of Russia between the 13th and the 15th century, and the article accused the invaders of raping lots and lots of women. Everyone thought this was a really strange thing to write about, and they started becoming really suspicious of him. And in 2008, Anatoly published a book about the history of the swastika as a solar symbol up until the 19th century, and he was accused of being a fascist, and the authorities became really interested in him. In 2011, after the Domodedovo International Airport bombings, there was unfortunately a lot of anti-Muslim activity in the area, and a lot of Muslim graves were being destroyed. Anatoly was visiting Muslim cemeteries and he was painting the graves and attaching newspaper clippings to the headstones. So because of the articles he'd been publishing, and because Anatoly had been seen around cemeteries and now loads of these headstones and graves were being destroyed, they suspected him. On the 2nd of November in 2011, authorities raided the apartment where Anatoly lived with his mum and dad. They were expecting to find extremist materials, but instead they found something else. They found 29 human-sized dolls. So if you don't want to see the dolls, look away. I'm going to be putting some pictures up of them. I wouldn't usually put pictures like this in my videos, but they're already literally everywhere, so it's not as though I'm releasing them to people. The dolls were all dressed up with makeup on their faces, and a few of them had music boxes placed behind the chests so they could either speak or play music. As the officers were searching the apartments, they noticed that when they picked up the dolls to move them, they'd rattle a bit, and they didn't know what it was, but they thought that maybe Anatoly had hidden something inside of it. When they opened it up, inside was the mummified remains of a human body. The other 28 dolls were exactly like the first, they all contained human remains. The story quickly spread about all these dolls, and Anatoly was known as the puppeteer. When Anatoly was arrested, his dad unfortunately had a heart attack and his mum was in hospital as well for a while, and it was all just because of the shock. They really didn't expect this of him. They always knew he was a bit strange, but as I've said a lot through this video, they just kind of let him do what he wanted, and he'd even expressed an interest in Russian dolls before, so his mum thought maybe it was just an extension of that. And the dolls look like paper mache, so that's what they thought he was. They thought he was just making them, and it was a weird hobby. He'd been collecting these dolls for over 10 years, and one of them even lived in his parents' room. Anatoly was heard talking to the dolls quite a bit, and his mum would be like, "Why are you playing with them? Are you a child?" The doll that lived in his parents' room was called Masha, and when his auntie was round for New Year, he sat Masha at the table and said, "This is Masha, do not be afraid of her." All the bodies that Anatoly had dug up to make his dolls from, they were all between the ages of 3 and 30, and I think the 30-year-old was a one-off. But he knew everything about the people that he used for this. He knew their names, how they died, their ages, their families, basically anything that was on the headstone, around their graves, on little cards, in the obituaries. He knew all the people's/dolls' names. The first body he dug up was on May the 9th in 2003, and this was pretty much straight after the argument he had with his parents about the adoption. He said that he was resurrecting the deceased with black magic. Anatoly said, "The coffin was covered with crimson synthetic matter. With a chisel I hollowed out a hole in the lid of the coffin at the head of the bed, and through it I pulled out what was left of the body. It was in very poor condition. The girl was dressed in a white blouse, black shirt, old tights and shoes. The child had long hair. Then I decided for the first time to try and mummify it. I moved the body to a remote corner of the cemetery and buried it in the abandoned grave of some grandmother. To properly mummify the body, you need soda and salt in various proportions. I bought these substances in the store. I found old stockings in the garbage dump and made bags from them, pouring soda and salt into them and tied them to the remains. I changed these bags once a week. If people paid attention to me, I said I was there to feed the birds." On July the 25th, 2003, I wrapped the body in different clothes and carried it back to my home in a backpack. Within 2 days, I restored the body. I stuffed rags inside, then I sewed the body with threads and made a wax mask on her face and then covered it with nail polish, which I found in the trash. After that, I put on her clothes, which I also found in the trash. Some of the dolls had buttons for eyes and others had masks that were made from cuddly toys. Anatoly completely cooperated with the police. He'd tell them all the cemeteries he found the bodies in, what the names were. On the 12th of May, he gave an interview to Russian journalists explaining why and how he was collecting the dolls. "The thing is, I'm practicing black magic. I wanted to revive them, and I felt sorry for these children who could still live. I kept them so that when science learns to fight cancer, it can later revitalise them. Genetics are developing now very rapidly. I felt sorry for all these children. I'm an expert in Celtic studies and studying Celtic culture. I noticed that the Druids had a tradition of communicating with the spirit of the deceased by sleeping on graves. When I studied the culture of the people of Siberia, specifically the culture of the ancient Yakuts, there too I found a similar practice. I also began to sleep on the graves of children who liked me. The spirits of the deceased children came to me. Accordingly, I checked whether it was demons that came or whether it was spirits. I collected all the information I could. Then, if possible, I checked this information. I was convinced that the spirits of the dead children really came to me. At first, I slept on the graves. Then I adjusted because it was not convenient to sleep there. Instead, I carried the bodies where it would be convenient for me to sleep on them. I began to dry them and bring them home. This was done very cleverly and slowly, one at a time, so no one knew about it. I studied the theory, the technology of mummification from all available books. I studied the ancient Egyptian scripts. I went to Moscow especially to study the whole thing. And the journalist said to him, "Well, what did you do with the dolls when you brought them home?" And Anatoly said, "I talked with them. We had a hierarchy, our own language. We had respectively our songs, we had our own holidays, we had our own inner peace. My parents saw almost nothing of this, and I did not let anyone else into this world. As a rule, my parents left the house for summer. leaving in April and returning in October. At this time, we were engaged in this world. I guess I really explored all that I could explore in this area of black magic. To be honest, I had my favourite children. I planned to keep my beloved children home in any case. Those that I liked less, I planned to take them to the garage, and they lived there in the garage. That's a bit mean. I did not disfigure them, did not dismember them. I applied all of my work gently, affectionately, politely. I even tried not to swear in front of these children. The fact is that I suffered very much from loneliness, especially during the summer period when my parents weren't there and when they took the cat. I sat them down, they had holes drilled under their eyes. I showed cartoons to them, played children's songs. I myself sang to them, ordinary children's songs that I would sing when I have a live daughter. After that, we ate together, or rather, I ate. I just offered them food, as it is in the Celtic or Yakut tradition. I've been studying child psychology for about 10 years, preparing for the upbringing of a child. I have experience of communicating with living children from my tutoring. What I would do with living children, I would do with these. I treated them as if they were alive. They were just temporarily dead. Anatoly even had birthday parties for the children as well with all the other dolls, and they'd celebrate different holidays together. He said that he knew what he was doing was illegal and he knew he was committing a crime, but he just felt so sorry for these children that had been left there. He also said that he wanted material for future cloning so that one day he'd be able to clone the children and they'd be able to live again. When he took the children out of the graves, he'd do it so well that people didn't know that the ground had been disturbed, so a lot of the families were still visiting the graves for years and years later, and nothing or no one was in there. In May of 2012, the trial of Anatoly Moskvin began. He faced 5 years in prison and was pretty much straight away found to be insane. But because of this, he was also exempt from criminal liability. A psychological evaluation diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia, and on the 27th of September 2013 he was sentenced instead to compulsory medical measures. So this basically meant that he went to a psychiatric clinic and his case was reviewed every 6 months, but there was no date that he was set to get out. He could be there for the rest of his life. And during the trial, a lot of the families of the deceased little girls were shouting to, give him the death penalty or give him life in prison. But unfortunately, they couldn't do either because he was clinically insane. Anatoly has to pay 75 grand in moral damages to each of the families of the children, but one family wouldn't take any money, and it was the dad of one of the children. He said, "I would not take anything from Moskvin. After all, he treated my daughter better than I had during her life. He dressed her, put her to bed, read her fairy tales and showed her cartoons." And apparently there's a big opinion split through this whole case. A lot of people feel the way that dad did, and a lot of people are just like, that's very strange. In his head, he thought he was doing a good thing. He didn't kill them and then do this. He just thought he would give them a better experience because he believed that they would kind of be aware of it. Does that make sense? Is this making me sound weird? Please don't think I'm defending this man. Obviously, a lot of my cases touch on mental health, and I genuinely do believe this man just thought he was doing a good thing, even though it is very strange. Apparently, Anatoly was being treated really badly by the staff and by the other inmates in this clinic, but even his mum and dad don't want him to get out of the psychiatric place because they think that he will just do it all again if he does get out. But apparently he may have a future wife if he does get out, which is someone who is on the same philological course as he was. He said if he does get out, he just wants to return to work and to get married to this lady. But as of 2019, he was still in the psychiatric clinic and he hadn't been let out yet. That's the closest update I could find. So as far as we know, he is still there. So that is the very, very strange story, and that's what I mean about it was a bit different. No one was actually killed in this story. It wasn't a story of a murder, it was a story of messing with the bodies after a murder. So honestly, I've never heard anything quite like it. It's very strange. I do think everything that happened to him when he was little massively scarred him and made him this way. I want to say again, I'm not defending this man, but it kind of reminded me of Haunting a Hill House, if anyone's seen that. I've spoken to people about this, how interesting I find it, the way certain events in people's life can make them the way they are. Does that make sense? Obviously the attack on him when he was younger with that man he didn't know, that is horrific. obviously the whole thing with Natasha and with her funeral, that hurt him way more than I think he even knew. I think it's really strange the way your mind can subconsciously cling to stuff like that. It must have been massively traumatising for him. I just think it's really interesting how someone's mind can be just flipped around by life events, and it can just shape the whole person that they turn into, even if it's to something as extreme as what happened with Anatoly. So that's the case. I'm sorry there was a lot of quotes, but I thought it was best you hearing exactly what he said and hearing his thoughts and his actual words than me just kind of telling you it in my words. So thanks so much for watching. I upload a new true crime video every single Sunday. Please like and subscribe, comment below anything you want. Click the notification bell so you get told when I put one of these up. Thank you very much, and I will see you in my next one.